Evacuee goes to medical, not the tactical zone.
Sergeant Rivera's bark echoed across the sun-scorched concrete of forward operating base Al-Assad like a blade cutting through desert air. "Girl, you're walking the wrong direction." Raven Lawson scanned the perimeter in exactly 2 seconds. Exits, threats, high ground, cover positions. The automatic tactical assessment fired through her neural pathways, despite the throbbing pain in her right shoulder, despite the blood seeping through the white bandages into her fitted gray t-shirt. She moved with fluid precision across the Iraqi sand, combat boots leaving perfect impressions in the dust. Her blonde hair, twisted into a high bun with loose curls framing her face, caught the harsh sunlight that illuminated features carved from porcelain, pale Russian skin, dusted with natural freckles, ice blue eyes that missed nothing, an aristocratic nose that spoke of bloodlines far removed from this desert hell. "Understood," she replied, voice carrying undertones of authority that made Delta team members exchange uncertain glances. But her trajectory never wavered. "Are you deaf or just don't speak English?" Another Delta operative burst into laughter. "Need someone to carry you back to the nurses?" Captain Marcus Stone paused in adjusting his Barrett M82's scope, caught sight of her movement pattern. Fluid, economical, purposeful, like water flowing around obstacles while maintaining perfect situational awareness. Something cold crawled up his spine as he realized she wasn't moving randomly. She was advancing toward the optimal observation point overlooking the entire range, a position only his unit knew existed. "Wait," Marcus stood, leaving his beloved rifle propped against sandbags. Who are you?" Rivera waved dismissively, already bored with the entertainment. "Probably some contractor's wife got separated from the tour group. Happens twice a month." But Raven had reached her chosen position. She leaned against the concrete barrier, with stance so perfect it looked casual. Weight distribution optimized, sightlines clear, escape routes mapped, every angle calculated for maximum tactical advantage. Marcus felt ice water replace blood in his veins. He'd seen that exact positioning before, in a mission so classified it didn't officially exist, from an operative whose name appeared on no roster. "Lawson." The whisper escaped his lips like a prayer to the dead. Raven turned, finally looking directly at him across 40 feet of desert sand and 3 years of carefully maintained lies. "Took you long enough to recognize your own spotter." The world tilted sideways. Marcus Stone's carefully ordered universe, built on certainties like sunrise, gravity, and the immutable fact that Raven Lawson died in Fallujah, suddenly cracked down the middle like bulletproof glass under sniper fire. Private Williams, cleaning his M4 near the ammunition depot, glanced up at the sudden silence that had fallen over the range. The easy mockery died in throats. Even Rivera's perpetual smirk faltered as he registered the shell-shocked expression spreading across his captain's face. "Stone?" Rivera stepped closer, voice losing its casual cruelty. "You know this chick?" Marcus couldn't answer. His mouth moved soundlessly as neural pathways fired and misfired, trying to reconcile impossible data. The woman standing 30 feet away wore civilian clothes, carried herself like wounded prey, bled real blood from a very real injury. But her stance, her positioning, the way she'd dissected their entire tactical setup in seconds. "You're supposed to be dead." The words came out strangled, barely audible. Raven's lips curved in something that might have been a smile if ice could learn to express amusement. "Death is remarkably subjective, Marcus. Depends entirely on who's writing the report." The desert wind picked up, carrying traces of cordite and diesel fuel across the range. Somewhere in the distance, a helicopter's rotors provided steady percussion against the tension stretching between them like piano wire about to snap. Medic Johnson approached from the landing zone, drawn by curiosity and professional concern. "Ma'am, that shoulder needs immediate attention. I can escort you to—" "Negative." Raven's response cut cleanly through his offer. "Wound is stable." Johnson blinked, caught off guard by military terminology delivered with quiet authority. "Ma'am, with respect, you're bleeding through the bandage. That suggests—" It suggests field dressing applied under fire, sealed with coagulant, and stabilized for transport. Raven adjusted the bandage with one hand, movements speaking of medical training far beyond basic first aid. "I'm fine." The medic stepped back, suddenly uncertain. Civilian contractors didn't speak in tactical medical terminology. They didn't assess their own wounds with clinical precision that suggested extensive trauma experience. Colonel Hayes emerged from the command tent, drawn by reports of an unauthorized civilian in the tactical zone. At 55, he carried himself with the rigid bearing of a career officer who'd climbed ranks through political maneuvering rather than battlefield competence. His face darkened when he spotted Raven. "Sergeant Rivera, I ordered that woman removed from this area immediately." "Working on it, sir." Rivera's voice carried less conviction than usual. Something about the way she stood there, absorbing their hostility without flinching, accepting their assumptions without protest. "Ma'am," Hayes approached with bureaucratic authority wrapped around underlying nervousness. "This is a restricted military zone. You need to return to the medical facility for evaluation and transport back to the green zone." Raven regarded him with those ice-blue eyes for exactly 3 seconds, long enough to catalog his rank, assess his competence, and categorize him as a non-threat. "Of course, Colonel," but she didn't move. If you're already feeling that burning anger at how they're treating her, smash that like button right now. And hey, I'm curious, where are you watching this from? Drop your country in the comments below. I love seeing how far these incredible stories of hidden strength travel around the world. Now subscribe, because what happens next will make you believe that sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one everyone underestimates. Hayes's face reddened at the subtle insubordination. "Immediately, ma'am." "Understood." Raven's compliance sounded genuine enough, but her feet remained planted. She reached into her pocket, a movement so smooth it appeared casual, and withdrew a compass. Not the plastic tourist variety, but a military-grade instrument that caught sunlight like polished steel. Marcus felt his heart skip. Standard issue for special operations personnel, definitely not civilian equipment. "You lost or something?" Rivera tried to reclaim momentum through mockery. "Need GPS coordinates to find the medical tent?" Raven studied the compass face with concentration that suggested she was reading far more than magnetic north. Her lips moved silently, calculating, measuring, timing. When she looked up, her gaze swept the horizon in a pattern Marcus recognized from advanced reconnaissance training. "Actually," she said quietly, "I'm exactly where I need to be." The temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees despite the Iraqi sun. Even Private Williams, usually oblivious to subtext, sensed something shifting in the air. He set down his weapon and moved closer, drawn by instincts he couldn't name. Marcus forced himself to move, approaching Raven with steps that felt like walking through quicksand. Each meter closed between them brought back memories he'd spent 3 years trying to bury. The last time he'd seen that profile, she'd been pulling him out of a burning building, while half the insurgent forces in Fallujah tried to kill them both. "Excuse me, miss," his voice cracked on the words. "I need to ask, have we met before?" Raven turned to face him fully. For the first time since her arrival, she gave him her complete attention. Marcus felt the weight of that gaze like physical pressure, measuring, evaluating, deciding how much truth he could handle. "We've met," she said simply. The admission hit the assembled group like a grenade with the pin pulled. Rivera straightened, suddenly interested. Hayes stepped closer, bureaucratic radar pinging danger. Williams reached unconsciously for his sidearm. "When?" Marcus pressed. "Where?" "Does it matter?" Raven's deflection came wrapped in silk, but Marcus heard steel underneath. "You clearly don't remember." "I remember everything." The words came out harsher than intended. "Every mission, every firefight, every face. So, if we've met, then maybe," Raven interrupted gently, "your memories aren't as reliable as you think." Marcus's encrypted tactical smartphone buzzed against his hip. The device, featuring advanced satellite communication capabilities, originally developed for special operations in hostile territories. The ruggedized unit with quantum encryption protocols could maintain secure contact with command, even when standard communication networks were compromised. Military-grade medical monitoring systems integrated into the device tracked vital signs and stress levels of personnel in real time, providing critical health data that could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure during extended operations. But Marcus ignored the incoming message, too focused on the impossible woman standing before him to notice how his heart rate had spiked into dangerous territory. "Run her prints," Hayes ordered Rivera quietly. "Full background check. Something's not right here." Rivera nodded, but his usual enthusiasm for harassment had dampened. The woman's calm acceptance of their hostility felt wrong somehow, like she was playing a game with rules they didn't understand. "Ma'am, Private Williams spoke up, surprising everyone. If you're hurt, we should help. Whatever else is going on, that's just being human. Raven looked at him with something that might have been approval. Thank you, Private, but I don't need help. Everyone needs help sometimes, Williams persisted with the earnest conviction of youth. Nothing wrong with accepting it. Some people, Raven said softly, learn to help themselves. Others learn that depending on people gets you killed. The words carried weight that pressed against the assembled group like atmospheric pressure before a storm. Marcus felt recognition tickling the edges of his consciousness, not just her face, but her voice, her mannerisms, the way she spoke in careful truths that revealed nothing. Johnson, Hayes snapped, escort this woman to medical, full evaluation. I want documentation on how she got here, who authorized her presence, and why she's wandering around my base like she owns it. Sir, Johnson stepped forward reluctantly. Ma'am, if you'll come with me. Raven looked at the medic with patient amusement. You're going to force a wounded woman to medical against her will? For your own safety, ma'am. My safety? Raven glanced around the group. Rivera's aggressive posturing, Hayes's bureaucratic paranoia, Marcus's growing confusion. Which one of you exactly is concerned about my safety? The question hung in the desert air like smoke, because the honest answer was none of them. They were concerned about protocol, about unauthorized personnel, about maintaining the illusion of control. Her actual well-being never entered the equation. Williams stepped forward. I am. The simple declaration cut through layers of military hierarchy and masculine posturing. A 19-year-old private from Nebraska, who had joined the Army to pay for college and found himself in the middle of a conflict he barely understood, offering genuine human concern to a stranger. Raven studied him for a long moment. What's your name, Private? Williams, ma'am. James Williams. Well, James Williams. Raven's smile transformed her face, revealing warmth that had been carefully hidden behind tactical assessment. I appreciate your concern, but I promise you, I'm exactly where I need to be. Marcus felt pieces clicking together in his brain, fragments of memory that refused to form a complete picture. The way she said certain words, the slight accent that surfaced when she relaxed, the unconscious military bearing that contradicted her civilian clothes. Database search complete, sir. Analyst Carter emerged from the communications tent, tablet in hand and expression troubled. Partial match on facial recognition, but this is weird. Hayes snatched the tablet. What kind of partial match? System shows Raven Elizabeth Lawson, age 28, Special Operations Forces. But, sir, Carter hesitated. According to these records, she's been KIA for 3 years, died in Fallujah, November 12, 2019. The tablet might as well have exploded. Marcus staggered backward like he'd been shot. Rivera's mockery died completely. Hayes stared at the screen, as if the pixels might rearrange themselves into sense. That's impossible, Hayes said finally. Dead people don't walk into military bases. Dead people, Raven observed quietly, don't usually have much choice in where they walk. Marcus's legs gave out. He sat down hard on an ammunition crate, staring at Raven like she'd materialized from smoke. You died. I read the report. Explosion took out the entire building. No survivors. Reports, Raven said gently, aren't always accurate. But I saw... Marcus stopped, memory hitting him like a sledgehammer. The last mission. The building collapse. The explosion that lit up the Fallujah skyline. And afterward, in the chaos of evacuation, the devastating news that his spotter, his partner, had been lost. You saw what they needed you to see, Raven said. Believed what they needed you to believe. Rivera found his voice first. This is insane. You're claiming to be some dead special ops soldier? Prove it. Raven regarded him with those ice-blue eyes. What would constitute proof for you, Sergeant? I don't know. Do something special opsy. Show us some secret squirrel stuff. The request hung in the air like a challenge. Around them, the base continued its daily operations. Helicopters landing and taking off, personnel moving between buildings, the constant background hum of military efficiency. But in their small circle, everything had gone silent. Raven reached for her pocket again, this time withdrawing what looked like a standard field notebook. She flipped it open to a specific page and read aloud. Operation Sandstorm, November 8, 2019. Sniper Team Alpha 7. Target, high-value asset, Compound 17. Range, 820 meters. Wind speed, 12 knots from the southeast. Marcus Stone, primary shooter. Confirmed kill, 0430 hours. Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. Those details weren't in any official report. They existed only in classified debriefings that required security clearance levels beyond most personnel's access. How do you know that? His voice came out as a whisper. Because I was there. Raven closed the notebook. I was the one who calculated wind drift. I was the one who confirmed the target. I was the one who called the shot. Rivera stepped back involuntarily. That's classified information. You could go to prison just for knowing it. Hard to imprison a dead woman, Raven pointed out. Hayes was scrolling frantically through the tablet, cross-referencing files and databases. This doesn't make sense. If you're alive, where have you been? Why the fake death? What happened in Fallujah? Raven's expression closed off like shutters slamming down. Some questions have answers you're not cleared to hear. I'm a colonel in the United States Army. And I'm a ghost, Colonel. We operate by different rules. The word ghost sent electricity through the group. In special operations circles, ghosts referred to operatives so deep undercover they'd been officially declared dead. Urban legends whispered about in briefings, but never confirmed. Marcus struggled to process the implications. If you're alive, if you've been operational for 3 years, why surface now? Why here? Raven looked at him with something that might have been sadness. Because, Marcus, some missions require you to come back from the dead. Before anyone could respond, alarms began blaring across the base. Not the scheduled drill alerts, but the harsh, urgent klaxons that meant immediate danger. Personnel scattered toward defensive positions as loudspeakers crackled to life. Unauthorized drones inbound. All personnel to defensive positions. This is not a drill. The comprehensive defense contractor insurance and financial planning services that protected high-risk military personnel included specialized coverage for psychological trauma, permanent disability, and family protection during classified deployments. These premium insurance packages with investment portfolios designed specifically for military families provided financial security that standard civilian policies couldn't match, ensuring that those who served their country could also secure their future. But as chaos erupted around them, insurance policies seemed irrelevant compared to immediate survival. The transformation was instantaneous. Hayes barked orders into his radio. Rivera and his team sprinted toward mounted weapons. Johnson began setting up a field medical station. The organized calm of base operations dissolved into controlled chaos. Only Raven remained motionless, her ice-blue eyes tracking the horizon with predatory focus. "Ma'am, you need to get to the bunker," Williams shouted over the alarm. "Civilians aren't supposed to be in the open during attacks." Raven didn't respond. She was listening to something the others couldn't hear, processing data through senses honed by years of combat. Marcus noticed her stillness and felt familiar recognition. He'd seen that exact posture before, the way she became a statue when processing threats, calculating responses, preparing for violence. 3 drones, she said quietly, modified for surveillance but carrying payloads, approaching from the northeast at approximately 150 meters altitude. Rivera whirled around. "How the hell can you possibly know that?" Instead of answering, Raven moved toward the weapons rack with fluid precision. She bypassed the standard M4s and reached directly for Marcus's Barrett M82, 50 caliber, high-precision sniper rifle that required extensive training to operate effectively. "Whoa!" Marcus lunged forward. "That's my weapon. You can't just..." Raven's hands moved across the rifle with intimate familiarity. She checked the chamber, tested the scope alignment, and assessed ammunition in movements so smooth they looked choreographed. Every gesture spoke of thousands of hours of training, muscle memory burned so deep it operated beyond conscious thought. 50 caliber, modified trigger group, custom scope calibrated for extreme range, she murmured, more to herself than anyone else. "You always did prefer your equipment precise." Marcus stopped reaching for his rifle. Only someone who'd worked extensively with Barrett systems would recognize those specific modifications. Only someone with advanced training would handle the weapon with such casual expertise. "Permission to engage?" Raven asked, not looking away from the scope. The question cut through base protocols like a blade. Engaging enemy aircraft required authorization from command, proper identification, rules of engagement review. It wasn't something a wounded woman in civilian clothes should even consider, but the drones were visible now, dark specks against blue sky, growing larger as they approached the base perimeter. "System malfunction," someone shouted from the radar station. "Targeting computers are down. Electronic warfare package in effect." The base's sophisticated air defense systems, designed to handle exactly this type of threat, flickered and died. Screens went dark. Targeting radars spun uselessly. In seconds, their technological advantage had been neutralized. Raven settled into shooting position behind the Barrett, with movements so fluid they looked like dance. Her wounded shoulder never wavered. Her breathing fell into the deep, controlled rhythm that separated amateur shooters from professionals. If you're on the edge of your seat wondering who she really is, hit that notification bell, because this mystery is about to get a whole lot deeper. Comment below if you've ever been underestimated. Your stories matter just as much as hers. "Ma'am, you need authorization," Hayes began. "Sir," Marcus interrupted, watching Raven's setup with growing awe. "I don't think she's requesting permission. I think she's being polite." The first drone swept across the base perimeter, electronic signature jamming communications and targeting systems. Its payload bay opened, revealing instrumentation that could be surveillance gear or something far more dangerous. Raven fired. The sound of the Barrett's discharge rolled across the desert like thunder. 800 meters away, the drone exploded in a burst of metal and electronics, raining debris onto empty sand. She worked the bolt with mechanical precision, ejected the spent casing, and chambered a fresh round in less than 2 seconds. The second drone, attempting evasive maneuvers, received the same treatment. Metal fragments scattered across the base perimeter. The third drone climbed rapidly, trying to gain altitude advantage while maintaining electronic warfare capabilities. Raven tracked its movement through the scope, calculating lead time, wind drift, and target velocity with supernatural accuracy. Her third shot brought it down in a controlled fall that scattered wreckage safely away from base structures. Total engagement time, 47 seconds. 3 targets, 3 kills, 0 collateral damage. The sudden silence felt deafening after the rifle's thunderous voice. Slowly, personnel emerged from defensive positions, staring at the debris field scattered beyond the base perimeter. "Holy cow," someone whispered. Raven safed the weapon and stepped back, offering the Barrett to Marcus with the same casual gesture someone might use to return a borrowed pen. "Your rifle, Captain. You might want to clean the chamber. I fired it dirty." Marcus accepted his weapon with hands that trembled slightly. The metal was still warm from discharge, the scope still perfectly zeroed despite the rapid engagement. Everything exactly as he'd left it, except for the miracle of 3 impossible shots. How? The question came out barely audible. "Practice," Raven said simply. Hayes was screaming into his radio, demanding explanations from command. Rivera stared at the debris fields like he was seeing UFO crash sites. Even Johnson had abandoned his medical preparations to gape at the woman who'd just performed what should have been impossible. But Marcus couldn't look away from Raven's face, because in the aftermath of combat, her careful mask had slipped for just a moment, and in that instant, he saw past 3 years of carefully maintained lies to the truth underneath. She wasn't just someone who resembled his dead partner. She wasn't a convenient look-alike with military training and intimate knowledge of classified operations. She was exactly who she'd claimed to be. Raven Lawson, his spotter, his partner. The woman who died saving his life in Fallujah 3 years ago, standing right in front of him, very much alive and apparently very much still operational. "System restore complete," Analyst Carter called from the communications tent. "Electronic warfare package has been neutralized. All systems back online." Hayes whirled around. "How? What changed?" "Best guess? The source of the jamming was destroyed." Carter gestured toward the debris fields. "Whatever those drones were carrying, it's not jamming us anymore." The implications slowly penetrated the group's shock. The electronic warfare attack had been coordinated with the drone assault. Someone had tried to blind the base before striking, and Raven had not only identified the threat, but neutralized it with 3 shots that shouldn't have been possible. "Run full ballistics analysis," Hayes ordered. "I want to know exactly what happened here." "Sir," Marcus said quietly, "I can tell you exactly what happened. Someone who knows how to shoot just saved our base." Rivera found his voice. "She's not military. Look at her, wounded civilian in street clothes. She can't possibly what?" Raven interrupted gently. "Defend myself? Defend others? Or can't possibly be who I claim to be?" The questions hung in the desert air like smoke from the burning drones. Around them, base personnel were returning to normal operations, But nothing felt normal anymore. The careful order of military hierarchy had been shattered by 47 seconds of impossible accuracy. Private Williams approached cautiously. "Ma'am, are you okay? The shooting, with your injury?" Raven smiled at him with genuine warmth. "I'm fine, James. Thank you for asking." "How did you know about the electronic warfare package?" Carter asked from across the range. "That intelligence wasn't in any briefing." "Some things," Raven said carefully, "you learn by experience rather than briefing." Marcus was studying her with new intensity, pieces of memory clicking together like rifle parts being assembled. "The last mission, Fallujah, you said you had intelligence about electronic warfare capabilities. I thought it was analyst speculation." "It wasn't speculation, but the source was classified. You never told me where the intelligence came from." Raven's expression became unreadable. "Some sources are classified beyond traditional clearance levels." Hayes stepped forward, tablet in hand, and face flushed with bureaucratic frustration. "Ma'am, I need answers, official answers. If you're military personnel, I need your unit, your commanding officer, your authorization to be here. And if I'm not military personnel, then you just committed multiple felonies by discharging military weapons without authorization." Raven considered this with the mild interest someone might show in weather reports. "Interesting dilemma." "It's not a dilemma, it's a straightforward legal issue." "Colonel," Marcus intervened, "maybe we should focus on the fact that she just saved the base instead of worrying about paperwork." "The paperwork exists for a reason, Captain. Chain of command, proper authorization, rules of engagement, these things matter." "They matter," Raven agreed, "but they matter less than keeping people alive." The simple statement carried weight that pressed against the group like gravity. Because whatever paperwork violations might have occurred, the alternative was 3 drones delivering unknown payloads to a base full of personnel. Rivera was examining the debris field through binoculars. "Clean kills, no secondary explosions, no chemical traces. Looks like surveillance packages, not weapons." "Surveillance is a weapon," Raven said quietly. "Information kills more people than bullets." Marcus felt another piece click into place. "The Fallujah mission, the intelligence you provided, it wasn't from satellite feeds or signal intercepts, was it?" Raven didn't answer directly. "What do you think, Marcus?" "I think," he said slowly, "you were already operating in deep cover 3 years ago. I think the explosion that supposedly killed you was an extraction under fire, and I think you've been operational ever since." "That's quite a theory. Is it true?" Raven looked at him for a long moment, weighing her response. "Truth is often less important than perception." "That's not an answer. It's the only answer you're cleared to receive." Hayes threw up his hands in frustration. "This is ridiculous. I'm calling command. Full investigation, complete background check, and official answers to official questions." "Of course," Raven said agreeably, "though you might want to be careful about which questions you ask." "What's that supposed to mean?" "Some questions," Raven said gently, "have answers that change everything you think you know about your mission here." Military legal consultation services and advanced tactical training programs offered specialized support for veterans dealing with classification issues and career transitions. These comprehensive educational packages included cybersecurity certifications, leadership development courses, and legal advocacy specifically designed for personnel with sensitive military backgrounds who needed expert guidance navigating civilian careers while maintaining operational security protocols. But as Hayes contemplated the legal minefield of investigating a supposedly dead operative, he realized standard military law might not apply to someone who officially didn't exist. The afternoon sun was beginning to lower toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the base. Personnel moved between buildings with the steady efficiency of military routine, but whispered conversations followed Raven's passage. Word was spreading about the woman who'd materialized from nowhere and performed impossible shots. Marcus walked beside her as she moved toward the helicopter landing zone, trying to process 3 years of grief and guilt being overturned in the space of an hour. "Where have you been?" he asked quietly. "Around." "That's not an answer." "It's the best answer I can give you." They walked in silence for several steps, boots crunching on desert sand. Marcus wanted to ask 1,000 questions about the mission, about her survival, about why she'd let him believe she was dead, but he sensed that direct questions would only produce more deflections. "The guilt," he said finally. 3 years of thinking I should have saved you. Should have pulled you out before the building came down. Should have been faster, smarter, better. Raven stopped walking and turned to face him. For the first time since her arrival, her expression showed something beyond tactical assessment or careful neutrality. Marcus? Her voice was gentler than he had heard it since Fallujah. That guilt was never yours to carry. You were my responsibility, my partner, and you were mine, which is why I made sure you got out alive. The admission hung between them like a bridge across 3 years of pain. Marcus felt his chest tighten with emotions he'd spent years suppressing. I grieved for you, he said simply. I know. I blame myself. I know that too. Why? The question came out more desperate than he'd intended. Why let me think you were dead? Why put me through that? Raven was quiet for a long moment, studying his face with those ice-blue eyes. Because, Marcus, sometimes the only way to save someone is to let them think they've lost you. Before he could respond, Hayes' voice cut across the distance between them. Ma'am, I need you to return to the command post immediately. Raven glanced toward the colonel, then back at Marcus. Some conversations will have to wait. Will there be a later? Marcus asked. Or are you going to disappear again? She smiled, and for just a moment he saw past the operative to the woman he'd known in Fallujah. I'm not done here yet. The tension is killing you, isn't it? Share this video with someone who needs to see what real strength looks like. Trust me, they'll thank you for it after watching what's about to unfold. As they returned to the command area, Marcus noticed details he'd missed during the initial chaos. The way Raven moved through the base with perfect navigation, despite claiming to be a visitor. The way she positioned herself to maintain optimal sight lines while appearing casual. The way her gaze continuously swept for threats even while engaged in conversation. These weren't skills someone learned from training manuals. They were instincts burned into neural pathways through years of operational experience. Hayes was waiting with reinforcements, a full complement of military police and 2 officers Marcus didn't recognize. Official investigation mode, complete with formal protocol and documented procedures. Ma'am, Hayes began formally, I need to inform you that you're being detained for questioning regarding multiple security violations. Raven regarded the assembled personnel with mild interest. Am I under arrest, Colonel? You're being held for investigation. On what charges? Hayes consulted a prepared list. Unauthorized access to a military installation, improper handling of military weapons, discharge of firearms without proper authorization, and possible violations of classification protocols. Interesting. Raven seemed genuinely curious about the charges. How do you plan to prosecute someone who doesn't officially exist? The question hit the investigation like a wrench in machinery. Because if Raven Lawson was officially dead, if her identity was classified beyond normal military channels, then standard legal procedures might not apply. We'll figure that out, Hayes said with less confidence than before. I'm sure you will. Raven's agreement carried undertones that suggested she found the entire situation amusing. Though you might want to check with your superiors before proceeding too far down this path. My superiors. The ones who authorized my presence here. Hayes frowned. No one authorized your presence? You arrived as a wounded evacuee. Did I? Raven tilted her head slightly. Are you certain about that? Before Hayes could respond, Carter emerged from the communications tent with an expression of confused urgency. Sir? I'm getting some very strange calls from command. They want to speak with you immediately, something about operational security and classified personnel. The color drained from Hayes' face. In military hierarchies, urgent calls from command rarely brought good news for local commanders. What kind of classified personnel? Carter glanced at Raven, then back at his colonel. The kind that don't appear on standard rosters, sir. The implication slowly penetrated Hayes' bureaucratic confidence. If Raven was operating under classification levels beyond his clearance, then detaining her could be a career-ending mistake. Ma'am, he said carefully, perhaps we should discuss this privately. Perhaps we should, Raven agreed. As they moved toward the command post, Marcus found himself walking beside Rivera, who was uncharacteristically quiet. You buying any of this? Rivera asked quietly. Marcus considered the question. 3 impossible shots against moving targets. Electronic warfare countermeasures, classified intelligence, deep cover operations. He paused. Yeah, I'm buying it. But she's supposed to be dead. Maybe death is more flexible than we thought. Rivera was quiet for several steps. If she's really special ops, really deep cover, what's she doing here? What's the mission? It was the question Marcus had been avoiding, because if Raven was operational, if she'd surfaced after 3 years of deep cover, then something significant was happening, something that required a ghost to come back from the dead. "I don't know," he said finally, "but I don't think we're going to like the answer." Inside the command post, Hayes was discovering that investigation protocols became significantly more complicated when the subject of investigation had clearance levels that exceeded the investigator's authority. "Yes, sir," he was saying into a secure phone. "I understand the sensitivity, but she discharged weapons without authorization. Protocol clearly states—" He fell silent, listening to whatever was being said on the other end. His expression progressed through confusion, concern, and finally, something approaching fear. "Yes, sir, I understand. Full cooperation, no questions." He hung up and turned to Raven. "Ma'am, I've been instructed to provide you with any assistance you require." "That's very kind," Raven said. "I don't require assistance." "Then, what do you require?" Raven looked out of the window toward the helicopter landing zone, where the aircraft that had brought the wounded was preparing for departure. "I require you to forget I was ever here." Hayes blinked. "Ma'am, official records will show that 3 drones were destroyed by base defense systems during an electronic warfare attack. No mention of individual personnel, no unusual incidents, no investigation required. But the ballistics evidence will show that the Barrett M82 assigned to Captain Stone fired 3 rounds during a defensive engagement. Nothing unusual about a sniper using his weapon to defend his base." Marcus felt pieces of the puzzle clicking together. "You're erasing yourself from the record. I was never in the record to begin with. But we all saw— You saw base defense systems function exactly as designed during an enemy attack. Nothing more, nothing less. The elegant simplicity of it was almost artistic. No paperwork violations if no paperwork existed. No investigation if there was nothing to investigate. No questions if there were no answers to be found." Rivera spoke up from across the room. "What about us? We're supposed to just forget this happened." Raven looked at him with something that might have been pity. "Sergeant, do you really want to be the person who files a report claiming that a dead woman saved the base?" The question highlighted the impossible position they were in. Report the truth and face questions about their mental stability. Report fiction and commit official fraud. Or report nothing and pretend the most significant event of their deployment never occurred. "This is insane," Rivera muttered. "This is operational security," Raven corrected gently. "Sometimes the most important victories are the ones nobody can talk about." Private Williams had been silent through most of the discussion, but now he stepped forward with the earnest conviction that made him both admirable and dangerous. "Ma'am, I just want to say thank you for protecting us, for doing what needed to be done." Raven smiled at him with genuine warmth. "You're welcome, James. But remember, this never happened." "How can I forget something like this?" "Practice," she said simply. "Lots of practice." The helicopter's rotors were spinning up for departure. Through the window, Marcus could see the last of the wounded being loaded aboard. In minutes, the aircraft would lift off and carry them back toward the rear echelon medical facilities. "You're leaving," he said. It wasn't a question. "I never arrived," Raven corrected. "Just a wounded evacuee being transported for medical treatment." "Will I see you again?" Raven considered the question with the same careful attention she'd given everything else. "That depends, Marcus, on whether you can live with not knowing the answers to your questions." It was a challenge wrapped in gentle words. Marcus understood that pushing for more information, demanding explanations, trying to force the truth into official channels would only ensure that Raven disappeared forever. "I can live with it," he said finally. "Good." She moved toward the door, then paused. "Marcus, the guilt that you've been carrying, let it go. What happened in Fallujah? You couldn't have changed it, but you can change what happens next." Before he could ask what that meant, she was gone, moving through the command post with the same fluid precision she'd shown since arrival, heading toward the helicopter that would carry her back into whatever shadows she'd emerged from. Marcus followed at a distance, watching as she boarded the aircraft without fanfare or official attention. Just another wounded evacuee being transported for treatment. Nothing unusual, nothing worth documenting. The helicopter lifted off in a cloud of dust and rotor wash, climbing toward the darkening sky. Within minutes, it was a speck against the horizon, carrying its cargo of wounded personnel and one woman who officially didn't exist. Rivera appeared beside him, shading his eyes against the rotor wash. Think we'll ever know what that was really about? Marcus thought about 3 impossible shots, classified intelligence, and a woman who'd let him grieve for her death to protect him from something worse. No, he said finally, and that's probably for the best. As the helicopter disappeared into the distance, Analyst Carter approached with a tablet showing the base's official incident report. Sir, Command wants confirmation of the defensive engagement summary. 3 drones destroyed by base defense systems during electronic warfare attack. No casualties, no unusual incidents. Marcus looked at the sterile language that would become the official truth. No mention of Raven Lawson. No record of impossible shots. No questions about the woman who would materialize from nowhere and save them all. Confirmed, he said quietly. Carter nodded and transmitted the report. Within hours, it would be filed in databases that would never connect it to deeper truths. The paper trail would be clean, logical, unremarkable. But Marcus would remember. They all would. In the quiet moments between missions, in the spaces between official duties, they would carry the memory of a woman who'd proven that death was negotiable, that the impossible was simply a matter of perspective, and that sometimes the most important truths were the ones that could never be spoken aloud. As night fell over forward operating base Al-Assad, normal operations resumed. Guards walked their posts. Communications chattered with routine traffic. The base settled into the familiar rhythms of military deployment. But in the command post, a small group of personnel found themselves staring at empty space where impossible things had happened. And in the silence between them, they shared the understanding that they had witnessed something that would never appear in any official record, but would never leave their memories. The dead, it seemed, had very long reach indeed. If this revelation just gave you chills, you need to see what happens when another ordinary person reveals their extraordinary past. Check out the video I'm dropping tomorrow about the janitor who shocked an entire military academy. Link in the description. Dawn broke over the Iraqi desert with the same relentless intensity it had shown for millennia. Forward operating base Al-Assad stirred to life with mechanical precision, personnel moving between duties, helicopters arriving and departing, the steady pulse of military operations continuing without pause. But in the space of 12 hours, something fundamental had shifted. Not in the official records, which showed nothing more than a routine defensive engagement. Not in the duty rosters, which reflected normal personnel movements. Not in the classified reports, which mentioned no unauthorized individuals or unusual incidents. The shift was deeper, more personal, in the way Marcus Stone checked and rechecked his Barrett M82, running his fingers along metal that still held the memory of impossible shots. In the way Private Williams found himself scanning horizons with tactical awareness he'd never possessed before. In the way Sergeant Rivera discovered that his casual cruelty toward strangers had been replaced by something more thoughtful, more careful. They had been witnesses to something that challenged their understanding of reality itself. And while official channels demanded silence, memory refused to cooperate. Marcus sat in his quarters after the morning briefing, staring at a photograph he'd carried for 3 years. The image showed his sniper team from Fallujah, himself, Raven, and 3 other operators who'd rotated home after their tour. Everyone except Raven, who had supposedly died in the explosion that ended their deployment. But looking at the photograph now, with yesterday's revelations still burning in his memory, Marcus saw details he'd missed before. The way Raven positioned herself slightly apart from the group. The way her smile never quite reached her eyes. The way she held herself with the controlled tension of someone carrying secrets that went beyond standard operational security. Had she known, even then, that her apparent death was part of a larger plan? Had their partnership been genuine, or was he simply another asset being managed by someone playing a much deeper game? The questions circled through his thoughts like desert winds, stirring up dust that obscured as much as it revealed. A knock on his door interrupted the introspection. He opened it to find Rivera, looking uncomfortable in a way that had nothing to do with the Iraqi heat. "Stone, got a minute?" Marcus stepped aside, allowing Rivera to enter. The sergeant moved with less swagger than usual, his typical aggressive confidence replaced by something more subdued. "About yesterday," Rivera began, then stopped. "About the woman, about what happened. What about it?" Rivera was quiet for a moment, staring out the small window toward the helicopter landing zone where impossible things had occurred. "I've been thinking," he said finally, "about the way I treated her, the things I said, the assumptions I made." Marcus waited, recognizing the struggle of someone trying to articulate thoughts that challenged their worldview. "She could have embarrassed me," Rivera continued. "Could have made me look like a fool in front of everyone. Instead, she just handled the situation, protected the base, did what needed to be done. That's what professionals do." "Yeah, but..." Rivera turned away from the window. "I've been a sergeant for 8 years. Thought I knew how to read people. Thought I could spot weakness, incompetence, people who didn't belong." He paused. "Turns out, I don't know anything." It was as close to an apology as Rivera was likely to offer. Not to Raven, who was gone and unreachable, but to the idea of her. To the recognition that his judgment had been catastrophically wrong. "Experience teaches us," Marcus said carefully. "Yesterday was a learning experience. Some lessons cost more than others." They stood in silence for several minutes, each lost in thoughts they couldn't fully articulate. Outside, the base continued its operations with mechanical efficiency, but both men understood that something had changed in the space between official truth and personal memory. "You think we'll see her again?" Rivera asked finally. Marcus considered the question, remembering ice blue eyes and the weight of secrets that extended far beyond normal military operations. "I think," he said slowly, "we'll see her exactly as often as she wants us to." Rivera nodded and left without another word, carrying his new understanding back to duties that would never quite feel the same. Alone again, Marcus returned to the photograph. But now, instead of studying Raven's face for clues about her survival, he found himself examining his own expression. The confident smile of someone who believed he understood his place in the world, his mission, his relationships. The innocence of someone who hadn't yet learned that death was negotiable, that truth came in multiple classifications, and that the most important battles were often fought by people who officially didn't exist. He slipped the photograph back into his footlocker and began preparing for the day's missions. Because whatever larger game was being played, whatever deeper truths remained hidden, his immediate duty was clear: protect his team, serve his mission, and carry forward the hard-earned knowledge that nothing was ever quite what it seemed. Outside his window, a helicopter lifted off from the landing zone, carrying personnel toward unknown destinations. Marcus watched it climb toward the horizon until it disappeared into the vast blue of a rocky sky. And somewhere in the back of his mind, a voice that sounded remarkably like Raven's whispered a reminder that had taken on new meaning. In the world of shadows and secrets, the most dangerous assumptions were the ones you made about the people standing right beside you. The dead, after all, had excellent reasons for staying that way. The next morning brought a routine that felt anything but routine. Marcus found himself checking equipment with obsessive precision, running diagnostics on weapon systems that had functioned perfectly for months. The Barrett M82 received particular attention, every component inspected, cleaned, calibrated, as if mechanical perfection could somehow explain the impossible accuracy he'd witnessed. But precision instruments couldn't account for the human element, for shots that defied probability, delivered by hands that shouldn't have possessed such skill, guided by knowledge that shouldn't have existed. Private Williams approached the weapons station with unusual hesitancy. "Captain, request permission to ask about yesterday's engagement." Marcus looked up from the scope he had been cleaning for the third time. "What about it?" "The defensive measures. The way the electronic warfare package was neutralized." Williams paused, choosing words carefully. "Was that standard protocol?" "Standard protocol. As if there was anything standard about watching a supposedly dead operative materialize from classified operations to save a base that shouldn't have needed saving." "Sometimes," Marcus said carefully, "situations require non-standard responses." Williams nodded, but his expression suggested the answer raised more questions than it resolved. "Sir, the woman who was evacuated, the wounded civilian, is she going to be okay?" The question hit deeper than Williams could have known. Because Raven's physical wounds were the least concerning aspect of her condition, it was the other damage, the psychological cost of deep cover operations, the isolation of official non-existence, the weight of secrets that could never be shared, that worried Marcus most. "I think," he said finally, "she's exactly as okay as she chooses to be." Before Williams could respond, alarms began sounding across the base. Not the urgent klaxons of attack, but the steady tones that indicated incoming priority communications. Personnel moved toward communication stations with practiced efficiency, but something in the air felt different, expectant. Marcus made his way to the command post, where Hayes was receiving a transmission that seemed to drain color from his face with each passing second. Understood, Hayes was saying into the secure phone. Full cooperation, complete discretion, no questions. He hung up and turned to find Marcus watching from the doorway. Captain Stone, report to the communications station immediately. Priority 1 transmission. Marcus felt ice form in his stomach. Priority 1. Communications were reserved for immediate threats, emergency evacuations, or classified operations that superseded normal command structure. The communications specialist handed him a headset with expression that suggested he had rather be handling unexploded ordnance. Sir, encrypted channel 7, authentication required. Marcus donned the headset and provided his security codes. The line crackled with encryption static before resolving into a voice he didn't recognize. Captain Stone, this is Deputy Director Harrison, Defense Intelligence Agency. I need to discuss yesterday's incident. The words Defense Intelligence Agency sent electricity through Marcus's nervous system. DIA operated at classification levels that made normal special operations look like public information. Sir, according to official reports, yesterday involved a routine defensive engagement against unauthorized drones. Captain Stone, the voice carried patience stretched thin. We both know that official reports sometimes omit classified details. I'm calling about the details that were omitted. Marcus felt the careful construction of yesterday's cover story beginning to crumble. Sir, I'm not sure what details you're referring to. The details involving a certain operative who has been missing from official channels for 3 years. The details involving capabilities that shouldn't exist in civilian personnel. The details involving a woman who officially died in Fallujah, but seems remarkably active for a corpse. The directness of it was almost refreshing after hours of carefully maintained fiction. Someone, at least, was willing to acknowledge that impossible things had occurred. Sir, what do you need to know? Everything, Kiston. From the moment she arrived until the moment she departed. Every word, every action, every detail you observed. This conversation is classified at levels that don't appear on standard clearance charts. Marcus spent the next 40 minutes providing a detailed account of events that officially never happened. He described Raven's arrival, her tactical awareness, her weapon skills, her intimate knowledge of classified operations. He omitted nothing, held back no details, offered no speculation beyond observed facts. When he finished, the line was quiet for several seconds. Captain Stone, I'm going to share some information with you. Information that will help you understand what you witnessed yesterday. Sir, 3 years ago, Operation Dust Veil was the most highly classified mission in recent military history. 6 operatives were inserted into Fallujah to neutralize a threat that could have destabilized the entire region. The operation was successful, but at enormous cost. 5 operatives were killed in action. 1 was listed as missing, presumed dead. Marcus felt his heart rate increasing. Sir, are you saying? I'm saying that sometimes, Captain, the most effective way to continue a mission is to officially end it, to take an operative so deep undercover that even their own command structure believes they're dead. The implications were staggering. If Raven had been operational for 3 years under complete communication blackout, if she'd been conducting missions that required total deniability. Sir, what kind of missions? The kind that keep civilization functioning, Captain. The kind that prevent wars rather than fight them. The kind that require operatives who don't officially exist because the operations they conduct can never be officially acknowledged. Marcus felt the scope of his ignorance expanding exponentially. He'd thought special operations were the deepest level of military classification. But apparently, there were operations so classified that even special operations personnel weren't cleared to know about them. Sir, why are you telling me this? Because, Captain Stone, Agent Raven 17 has been operating without direct support for 3 years. No backup, no extraction protocol, no communication with command structure. Yesterday was the first time anyone in official channels has had contact with her since the Fallujah incident. The weight of that isolation settled on Marcus like physical pressure. 3 years of complete operational independence, carrying out missions that couldn't be discussed with anyone, maintaining cover so deep that even allies couldn't know the truth. Is she okay? Deputy Director Harrison was quiet for a moment. Captain, that's exactly what we're hoping you can help us determine. Before Marcus could ask what that meant, the line went dead. He removed the headset with hands that trembled slightly, trying to process information that redefined his understanding of military operations. Hayes was waiting with expression carefully neutral. "Captain, everything all right?" "Sir, I'm not sure anything is all right anymore." The truth of that statement was reinforced an hour later when Rivera approached with news that sent ripples of unease through the base personnel. "Stone, we got a problem. Carter's been running continuous analysis on yesterday's drone attack. The electronic warfare signatures don't match any known hostile capabilities." Marcus looked up from equipment maintenance that had become increasingly obsessive. "What kind of signatures?" "Sophisticated ones. Military-grade encryption, advanced jamming protocols, frequency hopping technology that's supposed to be classified above our clearance level." The implications were troubling on multiple levels. If the attacking drones carried technology that exceeded their classification levels, then yesterday's incident was more significant than anyone had realized. "Any theories about the source?" Rivera's expression suggested he had theories he didn't want to voice. "Best guess? Someone with access to advanced military technology wanted to test our defensive capabilities. And they would have succeeded if not for..." He didn't finish the sentence, but both men understood what he meant. If not for a dead woman who'd materialized from nowhere to perform impossible shots with equipment she shouldn't have been able to operate. "Rivera," Marcus kept his voice carefully neutral, "what's your assessment of our actual defensive capabilities, without external assistance?" Rivera was quiet for a long moment, running mental calculations that apparently didn't produce reassuring results. "Honestly, without the electronic warfare countermeasures, we would have been sitting ducks. Our targeting systems were completely compromised. Manual engagement at those ranges, against moving targets, with that level of jamming," he shook his head, "we would have taken significant casualties." The assessment confirmed what Marcus had begun to suspect. Yesterday's attack hadn't been a probing action or random harassment. It had been a sophisticated test of base defenses, designed to identify vulnerabilities that could be exploited in future operations. And if not for Raven's intervention, it would have succeeded completely. "Sir?" Carter appeared at Marcus's shoulder with tablet in hand, an expression of confused urgency. "I'm getting some very strange data from yesterday's ballistics analysis." Marcus felt his stomach drop. "What kind of strange data?" "Trajectory analysis shows 3 perfect shots against targets following evasive patterns. But the calculations..." Carter paused, checking his numbers again. "The calculations show that those shots required predictive accuracy beyond human capability. Compensation for wind drift, target acceleration, equipment limitations. It's like whoever fired those shots could see 5 seconds into the future. The scientific impossibility of what they'd witnessed was beginning to penetrate official denial, because while they could maintain fiction about routine defensive measures, ballistics analysis provided objective data that couldn't be explained away. "Maybe the equipment calculations are wrong," Rivera suggested without conviction. "Sir, I've run these calculations 6 different ways. The margin of error is negligible. Those shots shouldn't have been possible." Marcus felt the careful construction of yesterday's cover story beginning to collapse under the weight of physical evidence. Because while they could classify conversations and bury witness accounts, they couldn't change the laws of physics. "Carter, I need you to classify that analysis at the highest possible level. No distribution, no copies, no discussion with unauthorized personnel." "Sir, are you sure? This kind of data could revolutionize our understanding of human performance limitations." "I'm sure. Some discoveries are too important to share." Carter nodded reluctantly and began implementing security protocols that would bury his findings in classified databases. But Marcus understood that scientific curiosity was a persistent force, and questions that couldn't be answered officially would eventually find unofficial channels. The afternoon brought routine training exercises that felt surreal given recent revelations. Marcus found himself watching his team with new awareness, cataloging their capabilities and limitations with tactical precision that had been sharpened by yesterday's impossibilities. Private Williams demonstrated competent but unremarkable marksmanship. Rivera showed professional skill typical of his rank and experience. Johnson displayed medical capabilities adequate for field operations, but limited compared to specialized training. Normal capabilities for normal personnel conducting normal operations, which made Raven's performance even more impossible to explain through conventional understanding. "Captain," Williams approached during a break in training, "request permission to ask about advanced sniper techniques." Marcus looked up from equipment checks that had become increasingly obsessive. "What specifically?" "Predictive shooting. engaging targets following evasive patterns, compensation for multiple variables simultaneously. Williams paused. Yesterday's defensive engagement showed capabilities I'd like to understand. The questions were natural for someone trying to improve their performance, but they touched on techniques that couldn't be taught through standard training because they required levels of situational awareness and tactical intuition that developed only through extensive combat experience. Williams, some capabilities can't be taught in classroom settings. They develop through practical application. Sir, how much practical application? Marcus considered the question, thinking about the years of partnership with Raven that had shown him levels of professional competence he'd never imagined possible. More than most people survive, he said finally. The conversation was interrupted by alarms that sent personnel scrambling toward defensive positions. Not attack warnings, but the urgent tones that indicated incoming, high-priority aircraft. Hayes emerged from the command post with expression of controlled confusion. Unscheduled helicopter inbound. Priority clearance from command. Full VIP protocol. Marcus felt recognition settle in his stomach like cold stone. Because VIP protocols were reserved for personnel whose presence required maximum security and minimum documentation. The helicopter that landed 20 minutes later carried no standard military markings. Black aircraft with tinted windows and rotors that whispered rather than roared. The kind of transportation that suggested passengers who preferred anonymity over official recognition. 3 figures disembarked, 2 in military uniforms that carried no unit insignia, and 1 in civilian clothes that screamed federal authority. They moved with coordinated precision toward the command post, ignoring the curious stares of base personnel. Hayes met them at the landing zone with military bearing that couldn't quite conceal nervous energy. Brief conversations, rapid exchanges of credentials, and sharp nods that suggested serious business being conducted through official channels. Within minutes, Marcus found himself summoned to the command post for a meeting that would challenge every assumption he'd made about military hierarchy and operational authority. The 3 visitors had taken control of Hayes' office with quiet efficiency. Maps, photographs, and electronic equipment that belonged to no standard military inventory. When Marcus entered, he felt like he was stepping into a parallel universe where normal rules had been suspended. Captain Stone, the woman in civilian clothes, stood to greet him. Agent Sarah Chen, Defense Intelligence Agency. These are Colonel Morrison and Major Williams from Task Force Black. She gestured toward the uniformed officers. We need to discuss yesterday's incident. Marcus felt déjà vu from his earlier conversation with Deputy Director Harrison. Except this time, the investigators were sitting in front of him with clearance levels that apparently exceeded his commanding officer's authority. Ma'am, I've already provided a complete report through official channels. Agent Chen smiled with expression that suggested she found standard official channels quaintly inadequate. Captain, official channels are useful for documenting routine operations. Yesterday's incident was anything but routine. She activated a tablet that displayed satellite imagery of the base, time-stamped from the previous day. High-resolution photographs that showed details invisible to ground-based observation. Satellite surveillance recorded the entire engagement. 3 drones destroyed by precision rifle fire from your position. She swiped to the next image. Ballistics analysis confirms Barrett M82 discharge. 3 rounds, 47-second engagement. Marcus felt his carefully maintained composure beginning to crack. Ma'am, standard defensive procedures. Captain, Colonel Morrison interrupted, with voice that carried battlefield authority. We're not here to question your defensive procedures. We're here to discuss the woman who executed them. The directness of it was almost shocking, after hours of careful euphemism and official fiction. Someone, finally, was willing to acknowledge that impossible things had occurred. Sir, according to official records, Major Williams said quietly, Agent Raven 17 died in Fallujah 3 years ago. According to satellite surveillance, she saved your base yesterday afternoon. The casual revelation that they knew Raven's operational designation sent electricity through Marcus's nervous system, because if Task Force Black had access to that information, then they operated at classification levels that made normal special operations look like public information. Sir, I'm not sure what information you're looking for. Agent Chen leaned forward with expression of professional intensity. Captain, we're looking for assessment of Agent Raven 17's current operational status, physical condition, psychological state, mission parameters, communication protocols, everything you observed during her time on base. Marcus felt like he was being asked to provide intelligence assessment on someone whose existence challenged his understanding of reality itself. Ma'am, she appeared to be... He paused, searching for words that could capture the complexity of what he'd witnessed. She appeared to be fully operational, tactically aware, professionally competent, physically capable despite injury. Psychological assessment? Marcus considered the question, remembering ice-blue eyes that revealed nothing, and careful words that suggested secrets extending far beyond normal classification levels. Controlled, disciplined, operating under significant stress but managing it effectively. He paused. Whatever she's been through, whatever she's been doing, it hasn't broken her. Colonel Morrison exchanged glances with his colleagues. Captain, that assessment is crucial because Agent Raven 17 has been operational for 3 years without direct support from command structure. No backup, no extraction protocol, no communication with official channels. The weight of that isolation settled on Marcus like physical pressure. 3 years of complete independence, conducting missions that couldn't be discussed with anyone, maintaining cover so deep that even allies couldn't know the truth. Sir, how is that possible? How does someone operate without support for 3 years? Very carefully, Major Williams said, and with capabilities that exceed normal human limitations. Agent Chen activated another display, showing personnel files that had been heavily redacted. Agent Raven 17 was selected for the Dust Veil program based on exceptional performance in multiple specializations. Marksmanship, tactical analysis, deep cover operations, psychological resilience. But the most important qualification was her ability to operate independently for extended periods. Marcus studied the redacted files, trying to piece together a picture of someone whose capabilities seemed to exist beyond normal classification. Ma'am, what kind of missions require 3 years of independent operation? The kind that prevent wars, Captain. The kind that neutralize threats before they become public knowledge. The kind that require operatives who can blend into civilian populations while maintaining military effectiveness. The scope of it was staggering. If Raven had been conducting solo operations against threats that could destabilize entire regions, if she'd been operating without backup or support for 3 years, ma'am, is she okay? Agent Chen's expression softened slightly. That's exactly what we're trying to determine, Captain, and your assessment is crucial because you're the only person who's had contact with her since the Fallujah incident. Before Marcus could respond, alarms began sounding across the base. Not attack warnings, but the urgent tones that indicated immediate security alert. Through the command post windows, they could see personnel moving toward defensive positions with practiced efficiency. Hayes burst through the door with expression of controlled panic. Priority alert from perimeter security. Unidentified vehicle approaching the main gate. Single occupant claiming official business. Agent Chen was already moving towards communication equipment. Vehicle description: civilian pickup truck, Iraqi plates, single female driver. Sir, she's requesting to speak with Captain Stone specifically. Marcus felt recognition settle in his stomach like ice water, because very few people would know to ask for him specifically, and fewer still would have the ability to reach an isolated military base through hostile territory. Agent Chen, I think your assessment opportunity just arrived. They moved toward the main gate with military precision that couldn't quite conceal underlying tension. Because if Raven had returned voluntarily, it suggested either complete confidence in her ability to handle whatever consequences awaited, or desperation that overrode normal security protocols. The pickup truck sat at the security checkpoint like a puzzle piece that didn't fit the military environment. Civilian vehicle, local plates, driven by someone who should have been in rear echelon medical facilities receiving treatment for wounds sustained in combat. But Raven Lawson emerged from the driver's seat with fluid grace that suggested her injuries were less limiting than they'd appeared. She moved toward the security checkpoint with confident steps, ignoring the weapons pointed in her direction by guards who had been briefed to expect unusual circumstances. Captain Stone, she called across the security barrier, I believe we have unfinished business. Marcus approached the checkpoint with awareness that every word and action would be scrutinized by investigators whose clearance levels exceeded his understanding of military hierarchy. Ma'am, you're supposed to be in medical treatment. Raven smiled with expression that suggested she found medical protocols quaintly irrelevant. Medical treatment is for people who intend to stay injured. Agent Chen appeared at Marcus's shoulder with professional intensity that radiated authority despite her civilian clothes. Agent Raven 17, I'm Agent Chen, Defense Intelligence Agency. We need to discuss your operational status. Raven regarded the federal investigator with those ice-blue eyes for exactly 3 seconds, long enough to assess threat level, clearance authority, and probable mission parameters. Agent Chen, I assume this discussion involves classification levels that exceed standard base personnel clearance. It does. Then perhaps we should conduct it in more appropriate surroundings. Agent Chen nodded toward the command post. If you'll accompany us. But Raven made no move toward the indicated building. Instead, she remained standing beside her civilian vehicle with posture that suggested she was prepared to leave as easily as she'd arrived. Agent Chen, before we proceed with official discussions, I need to address something with Captain Stone, something personal. The request carried undertones that suggested it wasn't really a request. Agent Chen hesitated, clearly unwilling to allow unsupervised conversation with someone who had been missing from official channels for 3 years. Agent Raven 17, operational security requires Agent Chen. Raven's voice carried quiet authority that cut through bureaucratic protocol. Captain Stone and I have shared experiences that predate your investigation. Those experiences require acknowledgement before we proceed with official business. It was diplomatically phrased, but Marcus understood the underlying message. Raven was offering cooperation, but on her terms. And those terms included private conversation with someone who had been her partner when partnerships meant survival. Agent Chen looked toward Colonel Morrison, who nodded almost imperceptibly. 5 minutes, Agent Raven 17, within visual supervision but beyond auditory range. Raven nodded acceptance and gestured for Marcus to follow her toward the edge of the security area. They walked in silence until they reached a position that offered privacy without violating security protocols. Marcus, she said quietly, I need you to understand something about what happens next. What happens next? Official debriefing, complete operational review, assessment of psychological fitness and mission effectiveness. Raven's expression was carefully neutral. Standard procedure for operatives returning from extended independent deployment. Marcus felt cold recognition settling in his chest. You're turning yourself in. I'm reporting for duty after successful completion of assigned mission. The distinction was important because it meant Raven wasn't surrendering or seeking extraction. She was returning to official channels as a professional obligation rather than personal necessity. What was the mission? Raven looked toward the horizon, where heat shimmer created illusions that danced just beyond perception. Prevention, Marcus. Always prevention. Stopping things before they start, neutralizing threats before they become public knowledge, maintaining stability through carefully applied pressure. For 3 years? For however long it takes. The weight of that commitment was staggering. Years of isolation, conducting operations that couldn't be acknowledged, accepting risks that couldn't be shared. Raven, are you okay? She looked at him with something that might have been surprise. That's the second time someone has asked me that question in 2 days. Maybe because people care about you. Caring, Raven said gently, is a luxury that operatives in my position can't afford. That's not true, isn't it? Raven studied his face with those ice-blue eyes. If I allow myself to care about people, to form attachments, to maintain relationships, then I create vulnerabilities that enemies can exploit. The most effective way to neutralize someone in my position is to threaten the people they care about. The logic was flawless and horrible. By maintaining emotional distance, by appearing to care about nothing, Raven protected both herself and anyone who might become a target because of their connection to her. That's no way to live. It's the only way to stay alive in my line of work. Marcus wanted to argue, to insist that human connection was worth any risk. But looking at Raven's carefully controlled expression, he understood that she'd made choices based on experiences he couldn't imagine. Marcus. Her voice carried finality that suggested their private conversation was ending. What I'm about to tell Agent Chen and her team, it will answer some questions and raise others. But I need you to understand that whatever you learn about my operations, about the missions I've conducted, about the choices I've made. She paused. Those choices were necessary. They prevented conflicts that would have cost thousands of lives. It was as close to an apology as she was likely to offer, not for deceiving him about her survival, but for the broader deception that had required her to operate outside normal human relationships. I understand. Do you? Raven's question carried weight that pressed against him like atmospheric pressure. Because understanding means accepting that some truths are too important to share, that some victories can never be celebrated, that some heroes must remain forever invisible. Before Marcus could respond, Agent Chen approached with expression of professional patience stretched to its limits. Agent Raven 17, we need to proceed with official debriefing. Raven nodded and began walking toward the command post, but after several steps, she paused and looked back at Marcus. Marcus, thank you for everything. The words carried 3 years of grief, guilt, and carefully buried gratitude. Marcus understood that this might be the last personal conversation they ever had, because once Raven entered official debriefing, she would disappear back into classification levels that existed beyond his clearance. You're welcome, he said simply. Inside the command post, Agent Chen and her team had transformed Hayes' office into something resembling a high-security briefing room. Electronic countermeasures, encryption equipment, and recording devices that belonged to no standard military inventory. Raven settled into the indicated chair with composure that suggested she'd been through similar debriefings before. Her posture was relaxed but alert, ready to provide information while maintaining operational security protocols. Agent Raven 17, Agent Chen began formally. For the record, please confirm your operational designation and mission status. Agent Raven 17, Task Force Dust Veil, currently operational under independent deployment protocols. Mission duration, 3 years, 4 months, 18 days since last official contact. The precision of her answer suggested someone who had been counting every day of isolation. Agent Chen made notes on a tablet, while Colonel Morrison and Major Williams observed with professional intensity. Mission parameters? Raven paused, considering how much classified information she could reveal in the presence of personnel whose clearance levels remained unclear. Threat assessment and neutralization in advance of potential regional destabilization. Target set included arms dealers, terrorist facilitators, and state actors engaging in activities contrary to U.S. national security interests. The clinical language couldn't quite conceal the scope of what she'd been doing. Single operator missions against threats that normally required entire special operations teams. Mission status? Primary objectives achieved, secondary objectives ongoing, tertiary threats identified and under surveillance. Agent Chen exchanged glances with her colleagues. Agent Raven 17, your operational independence has exceeded normal parameters for deep cover assignments. Assessment of psychological fitness for continued deployment? It was the crucial question, because operatives who'd been isolated for extended periods sometimes developed psychological conditions that made them unsuitable for further missions. Raven's response was immediate and precise. Operational effectiveness maintained. Mission focus stable. Psychological resilience within acceptable parameters for continued deployment. Physical condition? Minor injuries sustained during recent engagement, fully operational within 12 hours. Major Williams leaned forward with expression of professional curiosity. Agent Raven 17, yesterday's engagement at this base, was that related to your ongoing mission? Raven was quiet for several seconds, considering how to frame her response. Partially. The electronic warfare attack was conducted by assets connected to my target set. My intervention was both defensive and intelligence gathering. The revelation that yesterday's attack was connected to her 3-year mission sent electricity through the room, because it meant the sophisticated assault on their base had been a side effect of much larger operations. Intelligence gathered, confirmation of technological capabilities, operational methods, and target priorities. The attacking force was testing defensive measures in preparation for larger operations. Agent Chen's expression tightened. What kind of larger operations? Coordinated attacks against multiple military installations. The goal is to identify vulnerabilities that can be exploited during periods of political instability. The scope of the threat was staggering. If hostile forces were conducting systematic testing of U.S. military bases, if they were preparing for coordinated attacks. Agent Raven 17, immediate threat assessment, imminent, timeline measured in weeks rather than months. Colonel Morrison stood abruptly. Agent Chen, I need to contact command immediately. This intelligence requires immediate distribution to all relevant installations. But Raven raised a hand that stopped him mid-stride. Colonel, that intelligence distribution would compromise ongoing operations and alert hostile forces that their testing has been detected. Agent Raven 17, we can't allow multiple bases to remain vulnerable to attack. The bases aren't vulnerable, Colonel. They're bait. The word bait hung in the air like smoke from burning electronics. Agent Chen leaned forwards with expression of intense professional interest. Explain. Raven's voice remained carefully neutral, but Marcus detected undertones of satisfaction that suggested she'd been planning this conversation for months. For 3 years, I've been tracking a network of hostile operatives who've been conducting reconnaissance against U.S. military installations. Yesterday's attack was the culmination of that reconnaissance, a final test before launching coordinated strikes. And you allowed it to proceed? I ensured it would fail, in a way that provided maximum intelligence while revealing minimum capabilities. The elegant complexity of it was almost artistic. Raven had allowed yesterday's attack to proceed because failure would provide more valuable intelligence than prevention. The attackers had revealed their technological capabilities, operational methods, and target priorities while achieving none of their objectives. Agent Raven 17, that strategy placed base personnel at significant risk. Colonel, my intervention ensured 0 casualties while gathering intelligence that will prevent much larger attacks. The risk calculation was acceptable. Agent Chen was making rapid notes, while her colleagues exchanged glances that suggested they were processing implications beyond Marcus's clearance level. Agent Raven 17, you're describing a complex counterintelligence operation conducted independently over 3 years. Authorization for such operations typically requires approval from the highest levels of government. Raven's expression remained carefully neutral. Agent Chen, some operations are authorized at levels that don't appear on standard organizational charts. The implication was clear. Raven's missions had been approved by someone with authority that transcended normal military hierarchy, someone who operated in the spaces between official government and classified operations. Who authorized your mission? Someone with sufficient authority to make that decision. It was a non-answer that revealed nothing while confirming everything. Agent Chen understood that pressing for more specific information would only produce more deflections. Agent Raven 17, current mission status requires immediate debriefing at the highest classification levels. Transport will be arranged to appropriate facilities. Agent Chen, my mission isn't complete. The flat statement sent ripples of tension through the room. Because if Raven refused extraction, if she insisted on continuing independent operations, explain. Intelligence gathered yesterday confirmed the location of the network's command structure. Neutralizing that structure requires immediate action before they relocate in response to yesterday's failure. Agent Chen was quiet for several seconds, processing the implications of what Raven was proposing. Agent Raven 17, you're requesting authorization for immediate offensive operations against hostile command structure. I'm informing you that such operations will proceed regardless of authorization. The question is whether they proceed with official support or independent execution. The threat was diplomatically phrased but unmistakable. Raven would complete her mission with or without official approval. Agent Chen could either provide support or watch from the sidelines. Agent Raven 17, the risks of independent offensive operations are significantly lower than the risks of allowing hostile command structure to relocate and continue operations. Colonel Morrison had been silent through most of the exchange, but now he leaned forward with expression of professional respect. Agent Raven 17, what do you need? The question bypassed bureaucratic protocols and went directly to practical requirements. Raven responded with the same directness. Transportation to target location, communication support during engagement, extraction if mission parameters change, standard support package for independent operator. Timeline? Optimal window opens in 6 hours, closes in 18. Agent Chen looked toward her colleagues, engaging in rapid nonverbal communication that spoke of decisions being made at levels beyond Marcus's understanding. Agent Raven 17, authorization pending confirmation from command authority. Prepare for immediate deployment. Raven nodded acceptance, but her expression suggested she'd prepared for immediate deployment regardless of official authorization. Agent Chen, I'll need to speak with Captain Stone privately before departure. The request carried undertones that suggested it wasn't really a request. Agent Chen hesitated, clearly unwilling to allow unsupervised conversation with someone who was about to undertake operations that existed beyond normal oversight. Agent Raven 17, operational security. Agent Chen, Raven's voice carried quiet authority that that cut through bureaucratic concerns. Captain Stone will be providing support for this operation. He needs to understand parameters that can't be discussed in official briefings. Marcus felt electricity shoot through his nervous system. Support for operations that existed beyond normal classification levels meant exposure to information that could fundamentally change his understanding of military service. "Ma'am, I don't have clearance for—" "Captain Stone," Colonel Morrison interrupted, "you've just been read into operations that don't officially exist. Your clearance level is now whatever Agent Raven 17 says it is." The casual redefinition of his security access sent Marcus's world tilting sideways. Because if his clearance level was determined by operational necessity rather than bureaucratic approval, then he was about to learn things that couldn't be unlearned. Agent Chen gestured toward a smaller briefing room. 5 minutes, minimum supervision. Raven led Marcus into the adjacent space, where the absence of electronic countermeasures created atmosphere that felt almost intimate compared to the high-security environment they'd just left. "Marcus," she said quietly, "what I'm about to tell you will change how you understand military service." "How?" "Because you're going to learn that some battles are fought by people who officially don't exist, against enemies who officially aren't threats, using methods that officially never happened." Marcus felt the careful foundation of his worldview beginning to crack. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I need a spotter." The simple statement hit him like physical impact. After 3 years of independent operations, after conducting solo missions that normally required entire teams, Raven was asking for partnership. For tonight's mission? For whatever comes after tonight's mission. The implication was staggering. If Raven was offering long-term partnership in operations that existed beyond normal military structure, "Raven, I have duties here, responsibilities to my unit, my base, my commanding officer." "Marcus," her voice carried gentle finality, "after tonight, those responsibilities will seem quaint compared to what we'll be doing." Before he could respond, she was moving toward the door. Their private conversation, like all their interactions, had been measured in minutes rather than hours. "Raven, wait. I need to understand. You'll understand everything you need to understand. And Marcus," she paused at the threshold, "tonight, when things get impossible, remember that impossible is just another word for Tuesday in our line of work." Back in the main briefing room, Agent Chen and her team had received authorization that apparently exceeded their expectations. Electronic equipment was being packed with urgent efficiency while personnel made preparations for operations that required maximum mobility. "Agent Raven 17, Agent Chen announced, full authorization confirmed, all requested support approved, transport standing by." Raven nodded acknowledgement, but her attention had shifted to Marcus with expression that suggested she was assessing his readiness for operations that would challenge everything he thought he knew about military service. "Captain Stone, standard deployment protocol, light equipment, minimum signature, maximum flexibility." Marcus felt like he was being conscripted into a parallel military that operated by rules he didn't understand. But looking at Raven's ice-blue eyes, he understood that refusing wasn't really an option. "Ma'am, my equipment is already being loaded onto transport," Major Williams said, "including specialized items that aren't standard issue." The revelation that his equipment was being prepared without his knowledge suggested planning that extended far beyond spontaneous decisions. Someone had been preparing for this moment, anticipating that he would be needed for operations that required his specific skills. 20 minutes later, Marcus found himself boarding aircraft that bore no military markings and carried equipment that belonged to no standard inventory. Raven sat across from him with composure that suggested she'd made similar trips hundreds of times. "Marcus," she said as the aircraft lifted off, "there's something you need to understand about tonight's mission." "What?" "It's not about neutralizing hostile command structure. That's secondary." Marcus felt cold recognition settling in his chest. "What's primary?" "Preventing a war that would kill millions of people." The scope of it was staggering. If tonight's mission was about preventing large-scale conflict rather than tactical operations, "Raven, what aren't you telling me?" She looked out the aircraft window toward landscape that rolled beneath them like tactical maps come to life. "Marcus, what do you know about the Syrian civil war? Basic briefings, regional conflict, multiple factions, humanitarian crisis." "What you don't know," Raven said quietly, "is that it's being deliberately prolonged by people who profit from instability." arms dealers, military contractors, intelligence operatives who've decided that eternal conflict is more profitable than peace. The revelation recontextualized everything Marcus thought he understood about regional politics. If external forces were deliberately maintaining conflict, tonight's mission? Neutralize the command structure that's coordinating prolonged instability. Remove the people who've decided that Syrian suffering is an acceptable price for maintaining profit margins. Marcus felt the weight of moral complexity settling on his shoulders like combat equipment. Because if Raven was right, if tonight's mission could end years of conflict, how long have you known about this? 3 years, Marcus. Everything I've been doing, every mission I've conducted, every risk I've taken, it's all been building toward tonight. The aircraft continued its flight toward coordinates that appeared on no standard maps, carrying 2 operatives toward a mission that would either prevent a war or start one, depending on how precisely they could apply violence to achieve peace. Marcus checked his equipment with obsessive precision, running mental calculations for scenarios that extended far beyond normal tactical parameters. Because tonight, impossible accuracy wouldn't just save a base or neutralize immediate threats. Tonight, impossible accuracy might save a country. Raven, he said as they approached their target coordinates, if we fail, we don't fail, Marcus. That's not an option. The aircraft began its descent toward landscape that looked peaceful from altitude, but carried secrets that could destabilize entire regions. Marcus felt the familiar pre-mission tension that always preceded operations where everything mattered and nothing could be left to chance. Marcus, Raven's voice carried undertones he'd never heard before. Thank you for trusting me, for following me into something that officially doesn't exist. Where else would I go? She smiled, and for the first time in 3 years, Marcus saw past the operative to the person he had known in Fallujah. Exactly where you belong. The aircraft touched down on desert sand that had been witness to countless conflicts, carrying 2 ghosts toward a mission that would determine whether their names would ever appear in history books, or whether they would remain forever invisible heroes who'd prevented a war that never officially existed. As they disembarked into the Syrian night, Marcus felt the weight of impossible responsibility settling on his shoulders. But looking at Raven's determined expression, he understood that some responsibilities were worth accepting, regardless of the personal cost. Behind them, the aircraft lifted off into darkness, leaving them alone with equipment, training, and the quiet confidence that came from knowing they were exactly where they needed to be. The war they were about to prevent would never make headlines. The lives they were about to save would never know they'd been saved. The peace they were about to create would never be attributed to their actions. But in the space between official history and classified truth, 2 operatives moved through hostile territory toward a mission that would prove that sometimes the most important battles are fought by people whose names will never be remembered. In the distance, lights marked a compound where decisions were being made that would determine the future of a region. Marcus adjusted his scope, calculated wind drift and range, and prepared to deliver shots that would echo through history in ways that would never be documented. Ready? Raven asked. Always, Marcus replied. And in the Syrian darkness, 2 ghosts moved toward a destiny that would never appear in any official record, but would change everything. The compound ahead glowed with lights that revealed security measures designed to protect people who'd grown wealthy, prolonging other people's suffering. Marcus counted guards, cataloged weapons, assessed defensive positions with tactical precision honed through years of partnership with someone who saw patterns others missed. 12 hostiles, he whispered into his throat mic. Overlapping fields of fire, professional positioning. I count 14, Raven corrected gently. 2 in concealed positions you haven't spotted yet. Marcus swept his scope across the compound again, searching for the additional threats his partner had identified. After several seconds, he found them. Shadows that moved slightly differently than natural darkness, positioned to cover blind spots in the primary defensive perimeter. How do you see things I miss? Practice, Marcus. 3 years of staying alive by noticing details that other people overlook. They moved closer to the compound through terrain that provided minimal cover. Desert landscape that offered concealment through careful use of natural features rather than abundant hiding places. Each movement required calculation, each position demanded perfect timing. Raven, Marcus whispered as they settled into their final approach position, what exactly are we here to stop? A meeting that's scheduled to begin in 40 minutes. 5 people who've decided that Syrian conflict should continue for another 3 years to maximize weapons sales and construction contracts. The target set was becoming clear. Not a traditional military objective, but a business meeting where human suffering was measured in profit margins and quarterly earnings. Rules of engagement? Neutralize the decision makers, minimize collateral damage, extract with evidence that will prevent others from continuing their operations. Marcus felt the weight of moral complexity pressing against his tactical training. Because tonight's mission required him to act as judge, jury, and executioner for people whose crimes were measured in spreadsheets rather than battlefield casualties. Marcus, Raven's voice carried understanding that cut through his hesitation. Those 5 people have made decisions that killed over 40,000 civilians in the past 18 months. Their meeting tonight is to plan operations that will kill 40,000 more. The numbers provided context that transcended normal rules of engagement. If tonight's targets were directly responsible for mass casualties, if preventing their future operations could save tens of thousands of lives, I understand. Do you? Because what we're about to do will never be acknowledged, never be celebrated, never be recognized. We'll go back to our normal lives carrying the knowledge that we prevented mass suffering, but we'll never be able to share that knowledge with anyone. It was the price of operating in the space between official government and necessary action. Success that could never be claimed, victories that could never be celebrated, heroism that had to remain forever invisible. I can live with that. I hope so, Marcus, because after tonight, you'll never be the same person you were before. They moved into final position as lights in the compound indicated the arrival of tonight's participants. 5 figures who had traveled from different continents to coordinate activities that would prolong regional instability for profit. Marcus settled behind his Barrett M82, adjusting scope and calculating range, while Raven provided surveillance and intelligence through equipment that belonged to no standard military inventory. Target confirmation, she whispered through their encrypted communication link. Jonathan Hayes, arms dealer, specializing in surface-to-air missiles. Maria Santos, military contractor coordinating reconstruction projects that require continued destruction. David Kim, intelligence broker, selling targeting information to multiple factions. Each name carried a weight of documented atrocities, decisions that had resulted in hospital bombings, school destructions, refugee camp attacks. Tonight's meeting was to coordinate future operations that would generate similar casualties while maximizing profit margins. Sarah Wilson, logistics coordinator managing weapons shipments to all sides of the conflict. Michael Johnson, financial facilitator, ensuring payment systems that benefit from prolonged instability. Marcus felt the scope of their crimes settling in his chest like physical weight. These weren't traditional military targets conducting honest warfare. They were profiteers who'd decided that human suffering was an acceptable cost for maintaining revenue streams. Range 800 meters, wind from the southeast at 12 knots, target acquisition in 60 seconds. Marcus adjusted his scope with precision that had been honed through years of partnership with someone who understood that impossible accuracy was simply another tool for achieving necessary objectives. Raven, after tonight, what happens next? Next, Marcus, we prevent the next war, and the one after that, and however many wars we need to prevent to ensure that people like tonight's targets understand that profiting from human suffering carries unacceptable personal risks. The scope of their future missions was staggering, not just tonight's operation, but a campaign of targeted interventions designed to make war profiteering a profession with terminal career prospects. Target acquisition confirmed, 5 hostiles, interior positions, minimal civilian presence. Execute on my mark, Raven said quietly. 3, 2, 1, mark. Marcus fired 5 shots in 18 seconds. Each target neutralized with precision that left no doubt about intent or capability. The meeting that would have prolonged Syrian conflict for profit margins ended before it could begin. Targets neutralized, beginning extraction. They moved through the compound with efficiency that spoke of extensive planning and preparation. Electronic devices seized, documents photographed, evidence gathered that would prevent others from continuing the interrupted operations. Marcus, Raven said as they reached the extraction point, you've just prevented a war that would have killed over 100,000 people in the next 3 years. The weight of that prevented suffering settled on Marcus like a different kind of responsibility. Because saving lives that would never know they'd been saved carried obligations that transcended normal military service. And no one will ever know. No one who matters for official recognition, but the people whose lives we've saved, even though they'll never know we saved them, that matters more than recognition. The extraction aircraft appeared on schedule, black against the Syrian sky, carrying them back toward a world where tonight's mission would never appear in any official record. As they flew toward coordinates that existed on no standard maps, Marcus felt the transformation that Raven had predicted. He was no longer the person who had woken up that morning believing he understood the scope of military service. Raven, what we did tonight, how many times have you done something like this? 17 times in 3 years, Marcus. Each mission preventing conflicts that would have killed thousands of people. Each victory that can never be celebrated. Each success that must remain forever invisible. The aircraft continued its flight toward dawn that would bring normal duties and routine operations. But Marcus understood that after tonight, normal would never feel quite the same. Where do we go from here? Raven looked out the aircraft window toward landscape that rolled beneath them, like maps of future missions waiting to be planned. Wherever preventing wars requires us to go, Marcus. Wherever people are planning conflicts for profit, wherever human suffering is being calculated in spreadsheets, wherever peace needs to be enforced through carefully applied violence. The aircraft touched down at an airfield that appeared on no civilian maps, where personnel waited to debrief operations that officially never occurred. As they disembarked into pre-dawn darkness, Marcus felt the weight of his new responsibilities settling into place like well-fitted equipment. Heavy but manageable, complex but clear. Marcus, Raven said as they walked toward debriefing facilities that would process information too classified for normal military channels. Welcome to the real war. What real war? The one between people who profit from human suffering and people who have decided that such profits carry unacceptable personal costs. Marcus understood that his old life, the simple certainties of normal military service, the clear hierarchies of official command structure, the comfortable illusions of transparent operations, had ended the moment he'd agreed to follow a dead woman into missions that didn't officially exist. Any regrets? Raven asked. Marcus considered the question as dawn broke over landscape that had witnessed the prevention of a war that would never make headlines. He thought about the lives they'd saved, the suffering they'd prevented, the peace they'd enforced through precise application of violence against people who had decided that peace was less profitable than conflict. None, he said finally, and as they walked toward a future that would be measured in prevented wars rather than won battles, in invisible victories rather than public recognition, in lives saved rather than enemies killed, Marcus felt a satisfaction that transcended anything he'd experienced during normal military service. Behind them, the Syrian sun rose over landscape where a war had been prevented by people whose names would never appear in history books, but whose actions had changed the course of history itself. In the space between official truth and classified reality, two operatives moved toward their next mission, carrying the quiet confidence that came from knowing they were exactly where they needed to be, doing exactly what needed to be done, regardless of whether anyone would ever know they'd done it. The dead, after all, had very long reach indeed.
Behind every uniform is a person trying their best, seeing each other with respect. Thank you for being here. Don't forget to subscribe to TNG Story.